Propagandhi are a band that hold particular significance to me, not just because I'm a fan of fast music and in particular punk rock and hardcore, but because, as well as other world and life events, they played a part in my own personal political journey and helped to solidify the kind of principles and morals I hold dear to this day. Just to clarify, for those that don't know who they are, Propagandhi are a Canadian punk band formed in Portage-la-Prairie, I think I said that right, in 1986 by guitarist Chris Hanna and drummer George Samaleski. The band is currently located in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and completed by bassist Todd Kowalski and guitarist Sulan Hargo. If I've pronounced any of those names wrong, I deeply apologise. On their website they describe themselves as a secular progressive thrash band. I'd say that while that is indeed accurate, they are actually so much more. To set the scene and provide a little context of how I even came into contact with them, let me take you back to the late 90s. I was about 16 years old, and after having moved school I had met new friends and started getting into alternative music. Previously, growing up and going to school in Romford, I had kind of just followed the pack musically and had a brief period where I was into jungle. But when I heard Nirvana Nevermind for the first time, I was hooked. I went out and bought it, and the rest, as they say, is history. In those early years, one album that me and all my friends got into was The Offspring's Smash. I think if we were honest with ourselves, a lot of our initial enjoyment came from the swearing in Bad Habit. But through repeated listens, when we hung out, that was my portal into punk rock. I didn't know how important that would be later in life, but I remember I eventually bought the album myself, started spiking my hair, and took my jeans out in the back garden and ground the knees against a brick wall to wear holes in them so I could look like a total badass. Total dickweed, more like. But I thought I was amazing, and rather than continue listening to more punk rock, I went on a more broad journey into alternative music and spent a long time listening to and playing in new metal bands, and eventually started listening to heavier metal and metalcore. While I was out and about being a new metal jerk, my little brother was back at home, and unbeknownst to me, was sneaking into my room and taking my Smash CD and listening to it on his own. So I started him on his own punk journey. Whereas I had got into heavier music, he in the meantime continued to journey into punk, listening to NoFX and Lagwagon and other bands, and eventually later in life he started to show me some of the stuff that he had been listening to. At first he showed me AFI Black Sails in the Sunset because some of the riffs were a little metal adjacent, and I borrowed that album and started listening to it, and it brought me back to punk music. I'd started getting closer to punk hardcore anyway because of my interest in metalcore, but AFI started to bridge the gap. After that first successful suggestion, he started showing me other bands he thought I would like, based on the fact that I like metal and fast music, and eventually he handed me Today's Empire, Tomorrow's Ashes. I instantly liked parts of it, but they were a band I had to listen to more and more before I started to really like it. They definitely had fast, dynamic riffs. They were sort of tight yet had a looseness at the same time, and while they were similar to stuff I had already been listening to, they definitely had a unique style. If I was Rick Beato, I would be able to tell you what particular scales and chords they were using which gave them that particular feel, but in my non-classically trained way, I would say that the fast thrash style riffs were balanced by thoughtful, slightly melancholic, clean guitar parts, which created that kind of up and down, quiet and loud, ever-shifting style that I enjoyed in other music I liked. As a guitarist myself, I had spent many years just practicing palm muting, playing along to Fear Factory and stuff in my bedroom, really trying to get that cleanness of trapping the strings to create what you would now kind of call a djent feel. Not that I was trying to do anything like djent, I just wanted clean palm mutes. One of my long-standing friends who I have played in many bands with was trained on more bluesy stuff and was more into grunge and rock than the tight rhythmic style of some metal. And whilst he always admired the tightness and cleanness of my playing, I would in turn appreciate the sort of more organic and slightly looser style that he performed. It felt slightly messier, but very alive and full of feeling. And that is how I feel about some of Propagandhi's guitar parts. It will be racing along with thrash palm muting and then suddenly open up into these melodic open chord string picking. Sonically, their music grabbed me, and I'll be lying if I didn't say that I probably wasn't even listening to the words that much. One of the first songs I heard and ended up playing on repeat was Back to the Motor League. The more I listened to it, the more I started to absorb the lyrics. And with what would kind of end up being a bit of a trend with Propagandhi, they would lure me in, make me feel a certain way, and then fucking humble me later down the line. At first, all I really took from the song was the beginning lyrics of, I like to party fucking hard, I like my rock and roll the same, don't give a fuck if I burn out, don't give a fuck if I fade away. I liked to party fucking hard. Well, I probably thought I did at that age. But it wasn't until maybe a few years later that I even bothered to look up the lyrics on the internet, and when I did, I was sort of baffled. Like, what is a triptych for fuck's sake? It was obvious that there was more to this song lyrically than what my brainless moron mind had originally taken from it. There was a theme of discontent. Bands I used to listen to were thrown out there in the lyrics in what felt like an uncharitable style, and so I read more about it. I found out that it was Chris Hanna, the lyricist and the guitarist, talking about the fakeness of the scene and wanting to go back to a simpler time when he worked for a travel agency. I think the older I get, the more I can understand that feeling of wanting to go back in time. Not only to times when perhaps things were easier, but also in a sort of taking the blue pill kind of way. He talks about blow drying his hair and sticking it on a 10-speed, maybe signifying the different types of music he was listening to earlier in life, and perhaps at a time when he would have nothing more to think or worry about than partying fucking hard. Or maybe it was the scenesters that liked to party hard and he was being disparaging of their behaviour. There always feels like a bit of ambiguity in the band's lyrics that keep you guessing, and I've always felt that you have to work for it. Propagandhi aren't going to just dish out easy exploratory dialogue. There is an art to their craft. For the first time in my Propagandhi fandom, I was made to feel like potentially I was a little dumb for not understanding what he was saying, and even more so for taking the wrong meaning from the lyrics in the first place. I was, as the kids might say, shook. Do they still say that? Or am I 3 years too late? What this did mean though is I was like, what else have I not been paying attention to? The song that most succinctly summed up this feeling and probably had the most profound effect on me in a similar way to Back to the Motor League, but even more impactful, was, and I'm sorry, I'm going to do pronunciation again, Mate Ka Morris Ukun Rasik An. The song starts with Bela Gelhos, a former East Timorese independence activist and human rights activist, addressing a crowd and singing an East Timor revolutionary song. I didn't know that at the time, but I could to some degree understand it was maybe something political, but I just didn't give a shit about all that boring stuff. I just liked the way the song came in after the clip, which I felt gave it a good dynamic impact. I was performing quite a shallow appraisal of what was happening. I used to sing the first line when Chris starts singing of dickheads, shit talk, huddled and single file, first world frat boys and prairie skinheads who will never walk a mile. I even used to stop singing after that part, not because I was aware of what the lyrics meant, I wasn't, but because I just didn't remember them. They didn't seem to lodge in my brain, much like how I only really retained the first few lines from Back to the Motor League. If I had have retained the next lines, maybe I would have woken the fuck up earlier. It continues, or mourn a murdered friend in this tiny woman's shoes, drink up and mumble your abuse, I'm still humbled by it all. Talking about the suffering this woman had endured and the brainless twats at this benefit gig who were just waiting for the band to play and didn't give two shits for this woman's struggle or story. Bela Gelhos was sold to a soldier by her father as a child after the Indonesian armed forces invaded East Timor in 1975 for $5. Her mother campaigned for years and eventually Bela was returned to the family. She had suffered sexual violence at the hands of her family members and the Indonesian authorities. She joined the Timorese independence movement of young activists in 1991. Several of her friends were killed in the Santa Cruz massacre. She operated as a double agent for years under a different identity, working with the Indonesian authorities. Later, she was selected as a participant of a youth exchange program to Canada, and this allowed her to get out of the country and apply for asylum, where she then continued to campaign for human rights in East Timor. Once East Timor won independence, she resigned her position and has continued to fight for human rights and LGBTQIA+ inclusion. It is safe to say she has lived an astonishing life, and as Chris says in the song, "I'm still humbled by it all." So after finding out all of that and actually reading the lyrics which talk about the relative ease and privilege we live in the Western world, where Chris was able to ride his bike with no hands and get busy with girls behind the sportsplex, while this woman was sold, abused and had to watch friends and family die as she fought for her and her country's freedom, made me revisit those first few lines about first world frat boys and prairie skinheads, and I suddenly started to feel a slight sense of shame. I was those dumb fucks who just wanted the music to start, a brainless, ignorant moron. And looking around the internet, I was not the only person to have a similar experience with that song. Now, I always say you can't blame people for not knowing what they don't know, and how was I to know? But I think it says a lot about our education systems and our news media that we don't know about these things going on in the world. Like, where the fuck is East Timor anyway? Perhaps we shouldn't necessarily hate on those who are ignorant, but it just goes to demonstrate how much we don't know about the world we live in if we get to live in the privilege of the Western world, which gives us a certain layer of comfort in comparison to other places, even if it doesn't feel like we do sometimes. And I'm not saying people don't have hardships in the West. Like right now there is a genocide happening in Gaza and an attempted invasion in Ukraine. But do we hear about the countless other bloody conflicts playing out across the world? This song had a profound effect on me in how I think politically about the world. Recently I created a rather awkward situation when I started a new job and my new manager wanted the 4 new starters to put forward a song each that meant a lot to us and told a bit of a story about who we are. One of those bonding, getting to know you type things. I agonised for ages on what song to pick, and I wanted it to really say something about the kind of guy I am and what I hold dear. So I chose this song to bring to show and tell, as it were. It wasn't more than 10 seconds in that I realised I had made a mistake and sort of misread the assignment when the first guy put on Bruno Mars and said it reminded him of when he and his friends went for nights out. Then the next woman played a song that meant something to her because one of her boys was sick when he was born and nearly died, and it reminded her of that, and she had a bit of a cry and it was a slightly emotional moment. And then this guy comes along like some sort of cunt and plays, one sec,
Mate ka Morisukin Rasikin.
And then not only blasted these normies' ears off with fast punk rock, but then had to proceed to explain what the fuck East Timor was, who this woman was, and what the song meant to me. Captain Buzzkill to the rescue. At least I think I set the stage for myself pretty well. Now everyone knows what a filthy commie pinko I am, so job done, I guess. Anyway, after that song, I don't think I ever approached any Propagandhi song the same way. I was always looking for the meaning in the words, and I mentioned that the music was powerful sonically on its own, but there is nothing more energising than combining that music with the just and righteous fury of the lyrics. On more than a few occasions, their music brings a lump to my throat, sometimes through lyrics and other times just the music. The build in Purina Hall of Fame that erupts into a guitar solo gets me every time. If we turn our attention to the lyrics, one thing I noticed that I kind of like is that the lyrics don't always fit the structure of the song in the traditional sense. Like at the end of a bar, Chris will only be halfway through a sentence and will then continue that sentence at the beginning of the next bar. When my basic bitch ass used to write some lyrics back in the day, I sort of needed to conform to a more poetic structure, rhyming and having each sentence fit neatly into the structure of the song, song and be sort of the same length and rhythm. But when I listen to and then read Propagandhi's lyrics, it feels like the words and the message came first and then were made to fit. Like it is the content and the message that matters most, and there will be no compromise. And as I mentioned earlier, that no compromise extends to not seemingly worrying whether these lyrics will be understood by its audience. Sort of like a good joke. You trust your audience's intelligence to get it. When it comes to their lyrics, there is no joke, and no one pulls less punches than Propagandhi. I feel like they have educated me to some degree on every album. How else does a guy from the UK learn about Monday Night Hockey in Canada and who the hell Ron McLean and fucking Don Cherry are? I will always respect people who are uncompromising in their beliefs. The band have had beefs with their previous record label boss Fat Mike because, like me, they don't see a great deal of difference between the two neoliberal parties passing government back and forth between each other in the fucked up duopoly we find ourselves in. When Fat Mike wanted to put them on the Rock Against Bush compilations, they sent him Bullshit Politicians from the Tomorrow's Empire album. The lyrics go as follow. Bullshit politicians, bloated pin-dick motherfuckers. Bullshit politicians bow and courtesy to the seat of power. We'll never learn and nothing will ever change if we stay this course of followers and slaves. I can't believe we're still content just reshuffling the same old deck of kings and queens and faux democracies. I say we hand it back to the bullshit politicians. Fat Mike was very much of the mind that the Democrats would be better than Bush and didn't appreciate their choice, but still wanted to put the song on the record. But the liner notes for the track they sent with it read, "This message was not brought to you by George Soros, who is a billionaire who does back more progressive causes as well as being the source of just about every fucking conspiracy theory, but is still a billionaire who initially made his money through less than ethically squeaky clean means." But George was funding a lot of the organisations that Fat Mike was working with on this project, and so didn't want that message on there, and in the end the song got dropped because Propagandhi wouldn't back down. To be honest, there is a lot more beef between the two bands and indeed to that particular story, but in a lot more surreal and light-hearted ways, with them seemingly taking swipes at each other in their lyrics. I won't go into that here, but it does make for amusing reading, and from what I understand, they are on relatively good terms. But that is just an example of how they have never changed their message, never backed down, and have been true to what they believe in for decades. Now, I would tend to agree with them, even though we may have some differences of opinion on things. I may be a little bit more willing to bend in places. I fully believe there isn't a whole lot of difference between the two main parties in the UK, not now anyway, but I will hold my nose and vote for the lesser of two evils, even if we are talking about marginal gains, or rather, slightly less losses. Just as in the same way, I have some differences of opinion with old Uncle Jezza Jeremy Corbyn, the jumbly crumbly jam man, the magic grandpa, but I still respect him. I once went out for dinner with a friend and his now wife around 2017 after the election, and when I revealed I voted for Labour and Jeremy Corbyn, she expressed shock and exclaimed, "How could I?" We have a rather weird mental illness in this country where we kind of think that if someone doesn't wear the right suit or wouldn't just nuke people into oblivion at the drop of a hat, then they shouldn't be voted for or taken seriously. But my answer to her was that unlike the cadre of fucking slippery lying slag politicians who will weather vane that shit and see which way the wind is blowing and go where they think the power lies, you can go back 20, 30 or 40 years and watch videos of Jezza, and that beardy weirdo will be saying exactly the same things as he is saying today. Say what you like about him or Propagandhi. Disagree with them both if you want, but I'd rather someone had a moral code and were true to it rather than have no morals at all, even if I don't like them. I will respect you a lot more for it. But obviously I full-heartedly agree with both of these people, as you would probably expect by now. Which kind of brings me up to current day. As of writing this script, we are about a week away from Propagandhi releasing their new studio album, At Peace, and they have already released a song by the same name in advance of that. My brother sent me a link to it the other week with a message saying, "The world needs Propagandhi, more relevant than ever." Ain't that the fucking truth? The video with the animation and lyrics is excellent and I urge you all to watch it. I'll put a link to it down in the description. And I am not afraid to admit that it kind of choked me up by the end of it. If anything, just that its message is both simultaneously depressing as it is hopeful. As with all Propagandhi lyrics, I feel that this is open to personal interpretation and I do not know exactly what the band intends with their words, but I think there is definitely a less cryptic, more straightforward delivery here, like they aren't mincing their words deliberately and want to be unequivocally understood. But to me, it goes back to that theme of a moral core and not being shaken from it. That he is at peace with the fact that his views and opinions are probably unpopular in today's world, and that he has lost friends from sticking to his beliefs, but he is at peace with himself and he is okay with that. I identify with him when he sings about being fun at parties, like no one wants to hear about this shit because everyone just wants to get on with their lives. No one wants someone like me bringing them down because I just can't forget about it. I can't ignore what I see going on all around me. I feel hopeless. I don't know what I alone can do but keep talking about this stuff, keep ideas moving, even if it is on a relatively microscopic scale. I recently visited my parents and we got into an argument because they essentially said to me that I had to stop thinking about all this stuff as it wasn't doing me any good. And yes, they are right. It isn't doing me any good. It is fucking killing me slowly. But once you know it is there, how can you look away? How can I think of anything else? And they are indicative of a lot of people in this world. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to be brought down and depressed by this shit, because if they're honest with themselves, if we're all honest with ourselves, we probably wish that we would do more, but we can't. I said that maybe I keep speaking about it because of the fact that I feel so powerless, that I am desperate and trying to make myself feel better even though it is utterly futile. The song has had me on a Propagandhi hype ever since, and I was walking around the supermarket on my own doing some shopping and listening to them, and I just felt so alone. Looking at everyone else in the aisles just seemingly ignorant and not giving a shit, while I am here bearing the weight of all that is wrong with the world. Like we are just blindly and ignorantly and sometimes willfully driving our species off a fucking cliff. Now, I don't know if that is really what those people are feeling. One thing that I think is often true is that we tend to think that other people aren't like us, that we are different, when in fact that often isn't the case. People are pretty similar, we all worry about the same things. Perhaps all those people were just like me, worried sick, but just trying to get through the day. Perhaps I am a little worse because I spend time looking into shit and torturing myself with it. But in reality, we're all worried. A few days before, a couple of friends came round for dinner. Two comrades who believe in the same things as me and my partner do. One of the things that connects me and my friend is our shared and long-standing love of Propagandhi. We have shouted "This is class war" at each other on a number of occasions. I showed her the new Propagandhi video at the end of the night, and she also said that it kind of made her choke up. And that was comforting, to hear that someone else had the same experience as me, to know that someone else felt the same. And when I looked at the comments on the video, and also the next single they released, Cat Guy, I was buoyed by the fact that there were other people that were also welcomed new Propagandhi at this bleak time. As I was walking back from the supermarket that day, I bumped into that same friend, and I told her about the new song that had just come out since I'd showed her the At Peace video, and also explained to her my experience in the supermarket, and we hugged. A shared despair made better by just knowing that actually, despite my feelings only 30 minutes ago, I was not alone. So Propagandhi give me hope and the belief that, just like in my East London video where I talk about seeing the flyers posted on the streets calling for organisation and a new socialist alternative to fight back against fascism and racism, that we are not alone and there are other people still out there and we shouldn't give in. And that's why I love Propagandhi. Thanks for watching. I am still working on my World of Warcraft video, but that shit is long, and I am only halfway through the leveling process. If you are new here and you have come specifically for the topic of Propagandhi, and more to the point you are still watching now, I would wager we probably have a lot in common. This is my first of what should be many music related videos, but I usually make videos about stuff I like, so video games, films and music, but mostly video games, but always with a left wing slant, because I am just not good at keeping my feelings hidden and my mouth shut, and nor fucking should I. So let me know your feelings on Propagandhi in the comments, like and subscribe and click that fucking bell or whatever, and hopefully I will see you on the next one.